What if I told you the people you trust the most, your own family and the police, could orchestrate your kidnapping and call it legal? This episode will open your eyes to the terrifying world of guardianship abuse and what you need to know to protect you and your loved ones before it's too late. Imagine witnessing your mother being brutally kidnapped by police. Now try to imagine that your brother was the mastermind behind the whole thing. Hello and welcome back. This is Tiffany, your host of True Crime Connections. And joining us this week is Jonathan Farley, who knows all about this topic too well. I think that's proper English, but yes, way too well. So thank you so much for being here, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me.
What the hell happened?
Well, as far as I can make out, and the lawyers say I have to say upon information and belief, my brother Christopher John Farley may have stolen perhaps $1 million or more from my mother, Ina Farley. And in order to hide this crime or prevent us from doing anything about it, he kidnapped my mother with the help of my other brother, Anthony Farley, and orchestrated this now 2-year ordeal where he locked her away in a secret location with the help of the police in our area, and then proceeded to isolate her where practically no one was allowed to see or even talk to her. Even her younger sister was not allowed to visit or telephone her for 1 year, where she was drugged, obviously tortured. At one stage, she said she was beaten by an employee. And then eventually, my father's cousin, Dr. Jane Farley, an attorney, managed to free my mother from my brother's direct control, but he still continued his attack and harassment in the court, including getting a judge, Christopher Ciaccio, to sign orders saying my mother could not even return to the home that she was kidnapped from. And so my mother died alone in a memory care facility where she had been forced to go, not because a doctor said so, but only because a judge and a lawyer and my brother Christopher said so.
That is an insane story. So I did some little research and I did watch the video. So were they real cops? Because if they didn't take her to jail, they took her to a secret location?
So I don't know exactly her directly when they kidnapped her from the house. They were real police. They were members of the Monroe County Sheriff's Office in Monroe County, New York State. And my mother was actually kidnapped twice. But the second time, the video with the 1 million views on YouTube at the YouTube channel Free Ina Farley, there are also members of the Village of Brockport Police, which is the village that I live in. And we don't know exactly why they came. I have tried to get all the documents under the Freedom of Information law, and all they give me is a document written a few days after the first kidnapping, where they say they came with my brother just because he wanted to put my mother in a nursing home. That doesn't explain why they were there. This is not the video most people have seen, but by my estimate, there were 7 to 10 police officers. They say there are only 4. But that's what you do when you have a terrorist, when you have Al-Qaeda, not when you're taking someone to a nursing home. Moreover, that's not a
Wow.
police matter anyway. And then most importantly, my mother was the only person who could decide if she wanted to go to a nursing home. No third party gets to decide that. That's called slavery. And so the irony is that we have a situation of a woman who was kidnapped, who was 84 years old. But if she were 34 years old, everyone would understand this is a crime, and the people who perpetrated it all need to be immediately arrested. So far, all of the criminals have gotten away scot-free.
That is insane. When they came to the house, on what premise did they say that they were taking her on? Did they say she committed a crime or?
No. So the first time they kidnapped my mother, I had no idea. We had no idea why they were even here. So on or after January 19, 2023, 2 years ago, a woman named Mary How Say Ho, H-O, was put in my mother's house against my mother's wishes by my
Mm.
brother, Chris Farley. Within 3 days of that, on January 22nd, 2023, to be exact, a friend of my mother's from my mother's church named Connie Geist wanted to visit my mother and pray with her. And Mary Ho was here and would not let my mother's church friend of many years pray with my mother. Mary Ho said she's not on the list. And I was thinking, what list? My brother Chris has created a list, and only those people on the list are allowed to see my mother. My brother Chris lives 350 miles away. Before the pandemic, he visited maybe once a year. He doesn't know who my mother's friends are, and why should there be a list? Anyway, my mother was not mentally incompetent. No judge had declared her to be mentally incompetent. No doctor had declared her to be mentally incompetent. She could handle her own affairs. So um, the next day, I tried calling the house, and for the first time, the phone wouldn't pick up. We had an answering machine, and it just rang and rang and rang. And I thought, that's strange. What happened? But fortunately, my mother called me and said she's never been as frightened in her life, that she's never felt as stepped on in her life, that this woman, Mary Ho, treats her like an idiot dog. Those are my mother's words. And my mother called me the next day as well, saying she couldn't believe what Chris had done, putting someone in her house without her permission. My mother said she never would have done that to her own mother, that her mother lived happily in her home. Her own mother, that is my grandmother, lived happily in her home till she died. But I decided to go return to the home, which was actually my home, but I had a job in another location. And when I came back to the house, I saw something worse than what I had imagined. Mary Ho had taken over perhaps half of our house.
Oh,
In our garage, you couldn't fit a car there because there were 50 boxes, 50 boxes, belonging to Mary Ho in our garage. She'd taken over, by my estimate, about 4 rooms in the house. My mother had been in a particular bedroom for the dozen years since my father had passed away, and now my mother was moved to another room. Mary Ho had taken over the room my mother had been sleeping in. But even in the new bedroom that my mother had been put in, Mary Ho still had more of Mary Ho's belongings, including 2 gigantic suitcases, each one of which was larger than any suitcase that I'd ever tried to lift in my entire life. And my mother's belongings were strewn on the floor in disarray. My mother hates disarray. So my brother Christopher came with his 20-year-old son, Dylan Farley, that same night in an attempt, I suppose, to prevent me from helping my mother free herself from Mary Ho. But the next morning, all of them left. Mary Ho left, my brother Chris left, his 20-year-old son Dylan left after threatening my mother the night before, incidentally, physically. But Mary Ho's belongings were still in the house. My mother told Mary Ho by phone, don't return, except to pick up your belongings. And then 2 days later, Mary Ho did return, unannounced, with police, and my brother Chris and my brother Anthony, who, as far as I know, had not visited my mother for 2 years, had visited her 3 times in the previous 5 years. And they came, I thought, to force us to keep Mary Ho in the house. But to answer your question, the police did not say why they were there. They did not even say who they were. I did not see any, they did not show identification other than the patches they have on their uniforms. They did not tell us which police force they belong to. There are multiple police forces in the area. Now you can see it on their uniforms, but I wasn't getting close to a policeman to look at his or her shoulder. And I thought that, as I said, it was some kind of tenant issue because I did not know what the law was in New York State. It turns out Mary Ho was not a legal resident. She'd only been in our house for 8 or 9 days. But at the end of the half-hour period when the police were here, my mother was gone, and I didn't think anything of it. Now, if you watch the video at the website inafarleyjan31.com for January 31, 2023, it may seem as if I know that they're taking my mother, but I actually did not know, because otherwise I wouldn't have let them go. From the police body camera footage, though, we now know, and I was there and could hear most of it, that my mother was saying, I need to talk to my attorney. She was never allowed to choose her own attorney, denying her her basic constitutional rights for the rest of her life. My mother is telling everyone, please leave my house. They do not leave her house, which means they are guilty of criminal trespass from that point on, because my mother was the sole homeowner. She and I were the sole legal residents, and the only people whose names are on the deed were my mother and my late father. And when my mother went outside of the house, I think in an attempt to draw everyone out of the house because they weren't going when she told them to go, she says, I do not wish to leave my property. So that's clear proof that they kidnapped her, that she is saying, I don't want to leave. They did try putting her in a car, and she got out of the car and came back to the house to find out what was going on. She thought they were there for me. I thought they were there because of Mary Ho, but in fact, they were there to kidnap my mother. And that's what we learned from the first police report that we have, written a few days later, where they admit that they were there to take my mother. So it was a planned, illegal kidnapping, premeditated, on behalf of my brother, Chris Farley, who had no legal right to take my mother. Now, his modus operandi is to pretend he has legal authority that he does not have, and to rush people so that they take precipitous action without thinking about whether or not this is legal. So, for example, he claimed that he had power of attorney. I don't know if that's true. I have not verified any documents. I do know that police did not see any documents. How do I know this? Because when they kidnapped my mother the second time, we have the police on police body camera footage asking my brother what documents he has. So they're proving that they have not seen any documents. Whether or not my brother had the legal authority, police should not have proceeded without seeing it with their own eyes. But in actuality, he did not have the legal authority. Power of attorney, whether he has it or not, does not give you the authority to drag someone from her own house against her will and take her stuff. But in addition to that, he claimed he was healthcare proxy. Well, I have since seen the document that he has presented as the healthcare proxy form, and it clearly states that it only comes into effect giving my brother real power under 3 circumstances. 1, if my mother is terminally ill, which she was not. 2, if she's permanently unconscious, which she was not. And 3, if she has a permanent brain injury and will never again regain the ability to express her wishes. Well, in the second kidnapping video, which is the one that got the 1 million views on YouTube, you hear my mother screaming, leave me in my house. She clearly is expressing her wishes that she wants to stay in her house. The only authority police have to take someone is if that person is a danger to himself or others, which my mother was not. Now, I should explain for your viewers why there were 2 kidnappings. So when my mother did not return by midnight of the first kidnapping, I knew that she'd been kidnapped because I knew my mother wouldn't stay out past midnight. And so I waited 2 days because I thought from television shows that you had to wait 48 hours to report someone missing. So I did, and the police, in fact, one of the women who was a kidnapper, said that she would not allow me to report my mother missing because she was not missing. And so I said, then I want to report her kidnapped. And the policewoman said, I'm not going to allow you to report her kidnapped either. She had been kidnapped, obviously. So the next day, I went to the police station again. And At that time, I had a meeting with a Sergeant Anthony Mazenga, who would not tell me where my mother was, although he knew, he made it clear that he knew where my mother was. He would not tell me where my mother was, and he would not tell me why he was not telling me where my mother was. I don't know if this is legal, but it does not sound legal. Maybe your viewers can pipe in. This is like the Soviet Union putting someone in a gulag. We now know that my mother, in fact, was fighting to free herself. We have documents from the place where they put her. The place where they put her is called Cranberry Landing in a town called Arundecourt, New York. And their own documents say my mother was demanding that they free her, that she's their prisoner, that she's never been treated this badly the entire time she's been in the United States. She's from Jamaica, but had been in the United States for 60 years and had been a U.S. citizen for 40 years. And she wanted to call the police herself. An employee of Cranberry Landing named Retta Rivera told me months later that, in fact, my mother had demanded that they let her call me, and they did not allow her to call. So they denied her the ability to make phone calls. The facility has also admitted that they did not let her get mail in black and white in their own reports. So her rights were denied. In New York State, the Department of Health says that residents of assisted living facilities have certain rights. Among them is the right to receive mail. Mail must not be interfered with. You can see it on the Department of Health website. In addition, they say that one right that residents of assisted living facilities have is the right to see visitors of their choosing. Instead, my brother, after I discovered the location, which was about 5 weeks after the first kidnapping, my brother blocked almost everyone from seeing my mother, including longtime family friends. So ultimately, I subpoenaed the infamous list of my brother, Chris Farley. At that time, it contained 17 names, although I have no idea if that list was padded to make it look better, but still, only allowing 17 people in the entire planet to see a woman with no explanation is still insane. And as I said, the list excluded people like my mother's younger sister. It excluded my brother Felipe. It excluded me. It included my brother Chris's attorneys, which I've been told is actually not proper, if not unlawful. And it did include my mother's older siblings, but they could not travel by themselves. And I don't know if they ever did see my mother. But it was a situation of imprisonment, and I have since learned that this is standard procedure. That unfortunately, many children do kidnap their own parents and steal their assets. And the playbook is to isolate the victim, defame all protectors, and then loot the estate. All three have been done in this case. Some people list another 3 steps: isolate, medicate, liquidate. And indeed, my mother was drugged against her will, and we again have it from the records of the facility itself. They gave her a drug called Seroquel, which is for schizophrenics. My mother was not a schizophrenic. There's no history of schizophrenia in our family. And they admit that they gave it to her because they claim she was aggressive. Now, we cannot verify this because she was locked away in this gulag and with no one being allowed to see her. We weren't even allowed to send a doctor of our own to see her. But you're not allowed to drug people to curb aggression, and that's not one of the uses of Seroquel. And it increases, according to the FDA, the likelihood of death. It increases confusion. So imagine this. Ostensibly, they have locked the woman up because they claim she has some issue with her memory, but they give her something that makes her brain more confused. That makes a lot of sense. Now,
Did they ever have a diagnosis code? Did they say they diagnosed her with anything?
So they were claiming that she had Alzheimer's. However, in 2017, she did in fact see a medical doctor named Fred Marshall, who after a 45-minute interview, I took my mother to that, said she had Alzheimer's. However, at that stage, my mother did have a memory problem. She could not remember something that happened 2 weeks before, if that event had occurred after 2015. Why 2015? She fell and hit her head in 2015. That's when her memory problem started. So she could remember things that happened before 2015, but if it happened after 2015 and then 2 weeks had elapsed, she would forget it. I would love your viewers, the legal scholars, to do historical research and tell me if anyone has ever been violently, forcibly locked away in a loony bin because they couldn't remember what happened 2 weeks before. That doesn't endanger your life to not remember what happened 2 weeks before.
I couldn't tell
Uh,
you what I had for dinner 2 days ago.
yes.
Like,
And in fact, it's interesting you brought that up because for the second kidnapping, when Sergeant Mazenga came to our house, he was asking my mother questions like, what did you have for breakfast? And my mother knew this was some kind of trick question, so she didn't directly answer it. But yeah, I don't remember. Well, I do remember what I had this morning, but so what? Now, what happened in 2017 after this appointment with Fred Marshall, later in the year, after a visit with my brother Chris, which may not be a coincidence, my mother's memory did precipitously decline. At that point, she had trouble remembering what happened the day before. However, it remained constant for the next 6 years until Mary Ho moved in. I noticed when I saw my mother after Mary Ho moved in, she did seem more confused than normal. My mother told me she thinks that Mary Ho must have drugged her. And I can assert with 100% certainty, I don't need to say alleged. I'm not saying alleged. I know Mary Ho did drug my mother. How do I know this? I saw it with my own eyes. Mary Ho was giving my mother melatonin, which most people think is an innocuous sleeping pill, only my mother didn't have any problem sleeping. It was not one of the pills that she took because we had a list from her doctor of the pills she was supposed to take. And I found out later that sleep aids increase the risk of dementia and memory loss by 79% for people in my mother's demographic. So I suspect that my brother Chris Farley was trying to create, this isn't an allegation, that my brother Chris Farley was trying to create the condition that did not exist. But that's just what I saw Mary Ho give my mother. Who knows what Mary Ho actually gave my mother, but she was drugging my mother, and my mother was unusually confused in a way that I had never seen, except for 2 occasions when my mother had low blood sugar or when we thought she had low blood sugar. So what pills did my mother take? She took pills for high blood pressure, for diabetes. She took things like vitamin C, cranberry. So there was nothing that if she stopped taking them, even for days, her life would be in danger. Moreover, she did take them. She knew enough to take them. But when the police came the second time, and how did they come the second time? It's because I guessed where she might be. I didn't know the location where they're holding her, but she was supposed to meet a family friend at a music concert on a particular date. And I guessed that my mother might still be at that concert. And she was with Mary Ho. And I told my mother that Mary Ho, this woman, had kidnapped her 5 days before. And my mother said, let's go. She asked Mary Ho to step aside. Mary Ho didn't move out of the way, so my mother barreled past her. And then I asked my mother what she wanted to do, and she said, let's go home, which we did. And then police came 15 minutes later. Anthony Mazenga was one of the police officers, the Monroe County Sheriff's deputy, one of the people who should be arrested right now. But that was one of the questions he asked, what did you have for breakfast? And then later, some of the policemen said that my mother needed to take certain pills, and that's why they were going to remove her from the house. However, I told the police, and you can see this on the police footage at inafarleytaken.com, I say the pills are in the house. And in fact, the pills are still in the house. I left the pills on the table where my mother had been taking them when the police came the first time to kidnap her. So for 2 years and 3 months, the pills have stayed on the table. The pills were in the house, but as I said, they were pills for things like high blood pressure. And the police admit that there aren't any new pills that she's taking. It's the pills for things like high blood pressure that they have to give her, they claim. Now, this is not the role of a policeman. Moreover, you actually are entitled under the Nuremberg Code, if not anything else, to decide what medicine you want to take. They can't force you to take high blood pressure medicine. And as I said already, you don't die if you don't take your high blood pressure medicine, even within a few days. But as it happens, the pills were in the house. And you can hear me say it to police on camera. So that was the excuse they gave while they were here, but they never again mentioned that excuse at any time. It's not on any sheet of paper. Instead, after they forcibly removed my mother, she is screaming, "You're breaking my arm." And they tied up her hands and legs, which you're not allowed to do in a New York State nursing home. They claimed that they took her because she was showing aggression. But if you go to the YouTube channel for Ina Farley, you can see more than just the 9 minutes of violence. You can see what led up to it. And she's calmly speaking with police. She's actually calmly speaking with police for 2 hours, up until the time they use force on her. So it's just a lie that they said. Moreover, 2 doctors evaluated my mother at the hospital, which the police took her to, and said the condition is not found. So under the law, the police then should have returned my mother to the place they took her from, which was this house. And they never did. And my mother only saw this house again for 1 hour for the rest of her life. That was after my father's cousin had freed her from the control of my brother, Chris. But he still was trying to take the house, and he still was demanding that my mother should not be allowed to live in the house.
This was very carefully orchestrated. He
Yeah.
thought of
Yes.
everything.
Yes. I believe that he had planned this for years. In 2019, his wife, Sharon Epperson, was sued by a man named James Beelan Rogers Jr. She was sued for $2 million. And my recollection is that the lawsuit was settled 2 months later. But in October 2019, when the lawsuit was initiated, that's when my brother had my mother see a PhD psychologist. And I thought, well, that's strange. He didn't tell us about that. I found this out later, years later. So why is he having secret appointments? Or maybe he sent my mother's file to the man. Why is he having secret appointments? And someone with a PhD can't medically help my mother. And everyone agrees her memory won't improve. So what's the point anyway? I allege that he was hoping that he could have my mother declared mentally incompetent then, and then take all of her wealth and perhaps use it to pay off the $2 million lawsuit. But I can't say for sure because we've been denied access to all this information by the judge, Christopher Ciaccio. But I do know that the final settlement for the case, this seems to contradict what I just said about how I thought the case was settled in December 2019. But I do know that the final settlement of the lawsuit, the $2 million lawsuit, was done in December 2022, 1 month before the kidnapping. It's either a gigantic coincidence or there's a connection. But it seems reasonable to hypothesize, to allege, that my mother's wealth, which I estimate to be at least $1 million, and other people familiar with my parents' salaries and pension plans estimate to be at least $1 million, that was used to pay off this settlement. I cannot say for certain, but the money is now gone. I can tell you that.
I mean, to me, it sounds like a motive, a million
Yeah.
reasons why.
Yeah.
It's just insane to me. Did you ever find the document of your mom actually putting him in, like, over her care? Because it sounds like you were a lot closer to her than any of your other siblings, so wouldn't she have picked you? Like, I'd do a signature check, make sure that's her.
So no one was ever put over her care. So the document that my brother alleges gives him the power of attorney and making him healthcare proxy, those documents, one was done in 2008 and the other, I believe, in 2014. So my mother's memory problems started in 2015, and my father was still alive in 2008. So these weren't because my parents thought they needed care. It's just something we do. My mother had power of attorney over me, and it's just something we do in our family. And my parents' motives for making Christopher the power of attorney, their motives were that he, at that time, 2008, was the only one of us living in New York State.
Mm.
That's the only reason. It's not because they thought he was the better one. And since you're right, I made this again my home in 2012, even though I later got a job elsewhere, this was still my home. And so, yes, if my mother had thought about it, it would have made more sense for her to say, hey, I'm going to make you power of attorney. And in fact, the day before the first kidnapping, my mother did say, about 10 feet from where I'm sitting, that she wanted me to be the power of attorney. And so, again, this is wild speculation on my part. I'm wondering if my brother did not have listening devices and he knew that he had to act within 15 hours, which is what he did, because he heard that my mother was going to make me power of attorney. The reason for that, because she didn't want another Mary Ho put in her house again. But regardless, as I said, the healthcare proxy and power of attorney forms don't give him the power to do what he did. That was still straight up kidnapping. And the proof is in the pudding. My brother initiated a guardianship case 2 weeks after the first kidnapping, over 2 weeks after the first kidnapping, over a week after the second kidnapping. So obviously, he knew that he did not have the legal authority to do what he did, and he needed something called guardianship. Now, there was no guardianship case when my brother committed the kidnappings. There was no temporary guardian. There's no guardianship case at all. There's no guardian. This was just a straight up kidnapping of a woman who had 100% of her rights as a free adult, and whose only problem was that she couldn't remember what happened the day before, which, as I've repeated, is not a condition that puts you in danger.
Right. I mean, she's not turning on stoves and walking away, you know, things like that nature where you'd be like, okay, maybe you do need a little supervision. But if you can't remember what you did a few days ago, for the most part, I mean, that's half America.
Yeah. So it was the day before. And during the pandemic, I lived with my mother for 2.5 years during the pandemic. We isolated ourselves. I left on the stove once. So am I going to be locked away involuntarily?
I don't know, watch it.
So, but this is uh, the precipitous nature of the police action. We don't know exactly what my brother told them because it's not in documents. But we do know one thing. On the police body camera footage, he told a Deputy Wakefield that I might murder my mother within seconds if they did not get her out of the house. So it's curious that I was living with my mother for 2.5 years, but now I might murder my mother within seconds and they have to get her out of the house. This is after I had been with my mother alone in the house for 3 days after Chris Mariho and his son left the house. However, I want to point out that even the police didn't believe this. Deputy Wakefield said, okay, why do you think this? And Christopher's response, we have it on the police body camera footage, he was on the phone. His response was, because when Jonathan was living with my mother, he did not clean the house. You can watch it on the website, inafarleytaken.com. The fourth video, first 10
Yeah.
minutes.
That is not an excuse.
Not true. But regardless, it is an insane kind of response. And many things so how can we save other people from this? Well, now you know that there's this playbook. Some people call it the Brooklyn playbook for real estate fraud, but there's this playbook where you isolate the victim defame all protectors, which is what this was, and then loot the estate. My mother's estate has now been said to be in debt. So
Mhm.
it goes from perhaps having millions of dollars to being in debt in the 18-month period from the time she was kidnapped to the time that she died. So no one asked the question, where did that money go? You might think it went to lawyers, but no. The judge in the case said that my mother's money should not be used to pay lawyers, not Chris's lawyers, at least, and not my lawyers. You might think, well, but what about the facility? No, because my mother had MetLife long-term healthcare insurance, and she always told me that that would pay for everything if she ever needed it. So where did the money go? And that's a question that only I ask and my father's cousin, Dr. Jane Farley. She said, "Where's the money?" And but the judge does not say. In fact, Christopher Chacho fined me $13,000 in part because one of my attorneys wanted to get my mother's bank records, which I now know we were legally entitled to see. But the judge instead fined me $13,000 and fined my attorney $10,000. Something corrupt is going on. And the reason why so many people are caught in this guardianship abuse trap is that it is just this great gift to judges, to court officers. They know they can just take the money from the estate of the person who's been locked up, and then they just take it. And then once all the money is gone, coincidentally, the person dies. Just a pure coincidence. Person typically dies. So be on the lookout for this playbook. Be prepared to say there's a playbook because other people on the outside might believe that the person initiating the guardianship is acting in the best interests of the alleged incapacitated person when they are not. And because no people, except for the Menendez brothers, people typically cannot believe that children would do this to their own mother or their own father, but they do in numbers that are surprisingly large. So if more people were aware of this, and I hope a ton of people watching this will tell others about it, then it might be harder to kidnap and then ultimately kill and rob the next elderly person. But this is the real human trafficking problem in the United States, in many states. And we are working now to get a bill passed, which is called Karilyn's Law, Karilyn with a K, and that would prohibit anyone who is trying to block family members from visiting an alleged incapacitated person. That would prevent them from doing so unless there were a real reason, like a concrete reason. So, there are people who might be violent and then you want to keep them away. But unless it's something like that, family members should be allowed to visit. And then if Karilyn's Law had been law when my mother was kidnapped by my brother Chris, my mother, I am confident, would be alive today and indeed sitting in this house right now. But
Absolutely. Did you ever try to subpoena the bank for the records?
I have not because I am not an attorney. And indeed, my father's cousin, Jane Farley, is not a trial attorney. So we did not have the wherewithal or the knowledge to get this kind of information. But ultimately, I did get the records because once Jane Farley had freed my mother from my brother Chris's direct control, she was still given a guardian, but the guardian eventually became my brother Felipe. And so he could take her to her bank, and we got some records of how much was in her bank account. And so I saw that on January 26th, 2023, this may be confusing to people, but 5 days before the first kidnapping, there was a mysterious transfer of money to my mother's account of $145,815.49. Why do I repeat that figure? It's because the value of the house at that time, according to my brother and according to the county, was $145,900. So within $85 of this. So it stands to reason that these are the same amounts or represent the same amounts. And I allege that my brother was trying to sell the house to marry Ho. And he didn't have
Okay.
to do that because, as I said, it was my mother's house in my mother's name only. And there is a video on the YouTube channel for Ina Farley of Mary Ho saying she's going to take the house. So I think it's clear that this is partly what this was all about. And for 2 years, my brother Chris has been trying to take the house. And technically, the judge, Christopher Chacho, has given him my mother's house. So technically, this house, which is where I am right now, is under the control of my brother, Chris. And so you could ask the question, oh, wait a minute, if this wasn't about taking my mother's assets, if it wasn't about him just wanting the best for my mother and my mother's health, then why 7 months after she died is he trying to take her house? Because my mother said, and it's on video, that she wanted me to have her physical possessions after she passed away. So why is he doing this? And there are other questions that people should ask. For example, we saw the bank records, and as of April 6th, 2024, my mother had $197,000 in her bank accounts, and she had $37,000 in her retirement account, TIAA Craft Retirement Account. 10 days before she died, less than 4 months later, she had $0 in her TIAA Craft Retirement Account and less than $6,100, maybe zero, in her bank accounts, in her Chase bank accounts. Where did that money go? So that's the question I don't have the answer to. And when I raised it with a judge, he did the usual thing, threatened me with sanctions. So he's obviously, as I said, fined me $13,000, fined one of my attorneys $10,000, named Aaron Gavenda. He charged my father's cousin, Jane Farley, with contempt of court. He charged my brother, Felipe Farley, with contempt of court. But he has never once threatened sanctions against Chris Farley or Chris Farley's attorneys, even though I have a 130-page document with all the perjury committed by Chris Farley and his attorney, Miles Zetkowski, just in a 15 or 17-page collection of documents. So this is what the court is like. Obviously, something fishy is going on that needs law enforcement to investigate. But how do you get someone arrested if the people doing the arresting participated in the crime? So
Right. Clearly, your brother is paying off the judge, it sounds like, in my opinion. So
yeah, so
hopefully anyone who's listening who knows this stuff, who knows the ins and outs, can hopefully maybe contact you because you're looking for from people to be arrested. And what exactly are the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve?
So I want everyone in the video called You're Breaking My Arm on the YouTube channel Free Ina Farley to be arrested. That would be the police, including Sergeant Mazenga and Deputy Wakefield, and another policewoman named Aubrey Baldoff, but everyone in that video, including the ambulance personnel who helped tie up my mother's hands and feet. I want the executives of the memory care facility, Cranberry Landing, arrested for false imprisonment and whatever the crime is when you torture someone, when you drug someone. And I also want an investigation into how all of this happened. Oh, and my brother's attorneys should be, of course, charged with perjury. They just lie with reckless abandon, and nothing is ever done in court under oath, and in ways that are provably false. I'll just give one quick example. In a document that one of my brother's attorneys, Miles Zetkowski, sent to the judge, he claimed that my mother's bills were paid by auto pay because I had said that I paid the bills during the 2.5 years of the pandemic, or almost all of them. And well, this is a statement that you can prove is false. You just go to my mother's bank records and you'll see that nothing for 2.5 years, nothing was taken out for the garbage collection, for the telephone, for my mother's car lease, for the electricity, for the gas. It's just a simple matter. You can easily refute it. And yet all of those things were maintained. So obviously someone paid for them. And then, of course, I could just go to my credit card or debit card records as well. So this is the sort of thing that my brother and his attorneys have been able to get away with for 2 years. And not to make this too much about me, but just to emphasize how much of a criminal my brother is, On January 5, an agent broke into my house and they changed the locks in my house. Now, this is such an insane act. People then assumed, oh, maybe my brother must have been the real owner of the house because why else would he do this? And, but no, he just does something like this. And when I reported it to police, they have told me they're not going to take any action. So I am someone, and my mother, before she passed away, was someone, we were victims of a criminal from outside of the county who could kidnap us, commit or get others to commit assault and battery, steal, commit perjury, and now breaking and entering, as well as changing locks, which even if he owned the house would be an illegal eviction, but he did not own the house. I owned the house at the time. He's allowed to do this with complete impunity, and he knows it. What else will he do next? So my basic rights have been denied as well, even though, of course, my mother is the primary victim, and I want justice for Ina Farley. So I hope people can go to the YouTube channel for Ina Farley and see all of this. And I've given up trying to contact the local district attorney because she has been implicated as well. On the police video, Sergeant Mazanga says he called the district attorney's office. And so we don't know to what extent they were involved, but something strange happened. One day after I sent a letter to the district attorney's office, all of the videos on the YouTube channel Free Ina Farley were deleted. And a video on the YouTube channel Leroy Truth Investigations, which was about my mother. Who has the power to do this?
Right.
So it's all very peculiar. Someday this will go down in history as the most egregious human rights violation in the history of New York State, in the modern history of New York State, because there was slavery. And there'll be a massive investigation into the corruption within the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. Unfortunately, today it seems as if Christopher Farley is on the verge of victory. He got the judge to take my house and give it to the so-called estate of Ina Farley, which he controls 100% of. But, at one stage, things always look bleak. What's the phrase? It's darkest before the dawn. So I am optimistic that one day, at least my brother Chris will go to prison.
I am so sorry that you are going through all this. It's a lot, and it really sucks when it's your own blood that's doing it.
Yeah.
And clearly he knows what he's doing and
Yeah.
all the harm that he is putting on you and the rest of the family who are not on his side. And
Yeah.
it's a shame. If anyone out there is able to help you or has any information, what would be the best way for them to contact you?
So I have a website, latticetheory.net. I have to update it. Right now it'll say, do you really want to proceed to this website? But just proceed. There's a contact page. And so I can be found that way. What I need right now is for a reporter to do a story. And I also want the Attorney General of New York State, Letitia James, to just see 2 minutes of this video. And I'm hoping that she would then take action because the police misconduct really needs to be curbed. Without the police, my mother and I would be sitting in our house right now comfortably. And as I said, they had no
Absolutely.
authority to come here or to stay here once they were told to leave.
I'm going to make sure I put all those links in the show notes. And then once this is all done, I'm going to send it to other people that I know that work in those kinds of fields and see if that can help them in any way. I'd like to help you in any way that I can. It's unfortunate and it's greed and it's not the way you treat your elder mother.
No, she spent the last 18 months of her life, even after she was freed from my brother's direct control, still in Hades. Certainly during the year that he had total control over her, where she was beaten at one point by an employee of Cranberry Landing. You can see blood in her eye and 2 giant bruises on both sides of her face. And in the video, she complains about pain in her chin. And I want to point out that we do have some videos from when my mother was locked up because my mother's church friend, Connie Geist, was one of the very few people, well, the only person that I was in touch with who was allowed to see my mother. So you can see in these videos that while my mother looks and sounds terrible, she looks as if she has aged years in just a few months. But my mother does not at all sound mentally incompetent. And indeed, she had not been declared mentally incompetent officially. And so you can see this proof that this was just a woman who had been locked up against her will, a horrible fate. And then after she was freed from my brother's direct control, unfortunately, I was not the guardian. My mother couldn't have had a guardian, but I was not the guardian. And she was still being given the drugs that my brother Chris had put her on, which caused confusion. So she was still not, while there were times when she was clear, he was still kind of confused. And at other times and most times, and I could see that she was still being given, or I found out that she was still being given these drugs. And so that's how she spent the rest of her life. And again, she was not allowed to return to her house by the judge, but not because a doctor had said so. In fact, a medical doctor named Lisa Farley had said, Ina Farley can live with me. And the judge did not allow it. So a medical doctor was saying my mother could live in a house, her house, the medical doctor's house. And the judge said no. Not a doctor, a judge.
He's waiting for his payday.
So here's where I will say, upon information and belief, that seems like a reasonable theory. But I will definitely say that the judge's judicial immunity may not cover him for the crimes that he aided and abetted, because he knew my mother was being isolated, and he did block me from seeing or even talking to my mother without any reason. So you won't find my brother Chris saying anything bad about me before the first kidnapping, right? You would think that if I'm such a horrible person, there'd be something saying Jonathan is a horrible person. But it wasn't just me being blocked. My cousin Jane Farley was threatened with arrest if she tried to see my mother. And my brother Felipe Farley wasn't allowed to see or talk to her. No one was allowed to see or talk to her except the 17 people on the list that my brother Chris had created in violation of the New York State Department of Health's rights of residents of assisted living facilities.
Yeah, I'd never heard of that. It's all like jail. Like you have to be approved on the list. Like, what the hell?
Yes, exactly. Completely insane. And this is what family friends said when they tried visiting my mother and were turned away. It's like, what, is she in jail?
Right. Like, this is a home, a nursing home, not a prison. It doesn't make any sense.
And for her, it wasn't.
Hopefully we can, well, right. I mean, and they said that she was agitated. I'd be agitated too. If you're in my home, you won't leave and you're trying to take me.
Well,
Like,
this is what's crazy. Actually, my mother didn't get even that agitated until they used force on her. So they're lying when they said that they took her because she was exhibiting aggressive behavior. And you can watch the hours of the police video, edited only by the police, on the webpage inafarleytaken.com, and from another perspective, inafarleyfeb5.com for February 5, 2023. But in fact, they took her, remember, on January 31st, 2023. So what was their excuse then? And moreover, in the facility, of course, if we don't even know if what they said was true because they didn't allow anyone to see her. Even the Red Cross could visit Nazi prison camps and see what the condition was, right? But no one was allowed to see what was going on with Ina Farley, except for, as I said, my mother's church friend, and probably only under the condition that she not do it, not make a fuss. And on top of that, if you are locked up against your will, of course you're going to be angry. She was in a prison,
yeah.
and no one is explaining to her what was going on or why she was being held against her will. I would be aggressive every single day.
I think anyone would. And I'm really
Yeah.
glad that the church friend was able to get video. You know what I
So
mean? At least you got your evidence as far
yeah,
as what you have. And I hope we can get some results and some resolutions for you and make sure this does not happen to other families.
correct. Yes, let's hope so. And let's at least begin by passing Karilyn's law.
Absolutely. Jonathan, holy shit. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I really hope something good comes out of this.
Yeah, and I appreciate your having me on to spread this message. Thank you.